Private Frank Thompson, 2nd Michigan Regiment, Company F, Grand Army of the Potomac.
Mama, it's me, Emma. I'm writing this journal for you so that in case I don't see you again, I pray it will be sent to you so you can learn something of what I've done these past years. I know it will be strange for you to think of me as a man, your 5th daughter, especially when you remember how much I hated men when I was a girl. And of course, that was because of Papa. Papa was so mean to you, to all of us. My father was a tyrant. And he was about to marry me off. He'd already married off my 4 sisters. And he wanted me to marry this old man who had a farm next to ours. Well, I wasn't having it. I ran off. I was 17. Mama, you remember that book that the peddler gave me when I was 12? Fanny Campbell, Queen of the Pirates. Remember? I told you the story, how she cut off her hair and put on men's breeches and went to sea and became the captain of a pirate ship. And when I read that book, I had a feeling like a red-hot coal from the altar of the Lord. And I knew that I would not have to grow up to be a slave to a man like my father. And always after that, I kept on the lookout for how I could make my escape. And when it came, after I ran away, I was so worried that my father would find me. I saw an ad for a young man to become a subscription book salesman. And I knew I could do that. So, I got a suit of men's clothes, I cut off my hair, and I got the job. I became a young man hard to beat at selling books. I traveled. I was in Flint, Michigan, when Lincoln's call to arms came. Now, by that time I had friends, companions, young men like myself. And they were kind and thoughtful, not at all like my papa. More like my sisters, really. I was fond of them. And when I saw them get on the train and head off to war, I thought, what should I do? What should my part be in this great drama? And it came to me that I could better serve sick and wounded men dressed in men's clothing. That would mean less embarrassment for them and for me. So, my friends were members of the Flint Union Greys, the militia, and when I got a chance, I joined up too. I was a little worried about the medical. Regulations called for people to be stripped to the waist. But the doctor only looked at my hand. And he said, "What sort of work has this hand done?" I replied, "I have spent most of my youth, sir, getting an education." So I was in. And we traveled to Washington. 35,000 Union troops massed in Washington. We thought the war would be short. We thought that we could sweep rebellion from the land like an overwhelming torrent. And then the typhoid epidemic hit. Each regiment was responsible for its own hospital, and I was detailed to our hospital. Mama, I have inherited a talent for nursing from you. My hands have a magnetic quality to draw forth and release suffering and delirium. Well, finally, we were ordered forward. It was in July, and the men greeted the order with wild cheering, but I felt strangely out of harmony with that. I couldn't help but think that many, very many, of those faces would not return to tell of their adventure. We were ordered to occupy Manassas Junction. And from a forward position, on July 21st, 3 divisions set out before dawn, column after column, in deep silence. I had helped to set up a hospital in a stone church on the Warrenton Turnpike. And from there we could hear, when the firing started, the roar of the cannons and the muskets, even the clash of steel. And then the wounded began to be brought in with horrific injuries. Dead bodies were stacked up, and amputated arms and legs were thrown together in heaps. At times, I had to use my teeth to tear the thick woolen clothing, stiff with blood. A man was brought in with his legs smashed to fragments above the knees. He was dying, but oh, what a death. He was insane. He was perfectly wild. It took 2 persons to hold him. Death released him fairly swiftly. It was a great relief to us, as well as to the poor sufferer. Our hands and hearts were occupied with such scenes as this, and we had no idea what was happening on the field. We were surprised to learn that Union forces had been routed and were retreating in panic back to Washington, leaving the wounded in the hands of the enemy, and us, too, in a rather unpleasant situation. I didn't want to leave the men, but they convinced me that I would not be allowed to care for them when we were all captured. So, when we heard rebel forces at the front, I slipped out the back. It was chaos in Washington. Wounded and drunken soldiers in the streets. Until General George McClellan was brought in. And he began to teach us discipline, and he taught us how to be soldiers, and we loved him for it. He named us the Grand Army of the Potomac. All that winter, I was detailed to the General Hospital in Georgetown. And there, again, typhoid killed more men than battle wounds. I was called to witness so much suffering. Strong men dying all around me. In the spring, Colonel Orlando Poe had me appointed regimental mail carrier. It was a great relief to get away from the suffering in the hospitals. And I had a lot of freedom. They gave me a horse, and I could ride from camp to camp into Washington pretty much as I pleased, as long as I picked up and delivered the mail. Plus, everyone was happy to see me when I came. A chaplain told me at this time about an opportunity of great danger, but also responsibility. We needed information from behind the enemy lines. And I have always loved adventure. So I decided that I would volunteer. The first time I went behind the enemy lines, I disguised myself as a slave. I got clothes from the contrabands at Fort Monroe, and I put silver nitrate on my skin. which turned it a nice maroon color. I was able to slip through the picket lines and join a group of slaves who were working on rebel fortifications. I gathered what intelligence I could about the size of the troops, their positions, their numbers. But when I decided to leave, I found it was much more difficult to get away as a slave than it was to join the group. It took several days before I finally had an opportunity. I was ordered to take supper to the Confederate pickets. I did, and while I was there, a sergeant came up to me, handed me a rifle, and told me to fill in a gap in the line. "You black rascal," he said, "you fall asleep and I'll shoot you like a dog." So there I was, facing my own picket lines. But late at night, I found an opportunity to use that gap in the line to get away. The second time I went behind the enemy lines, I decided on a different disguise. I disguised myself as a woman. An old Irish peddler woman. I had to ford a river to get there, and I lost my way. I saw a house that looked to be deserted and went in, and there I found a Confederate officer dying of typhoid. And even though he was our enemy, my heart went out to him. And I nursed him through the night. He spoke to me of his wife and child. He gave me a gold watch that he asked me to take to his commanding officer. I said I would. I asked him if he was ready to meet his God. He said he depended upon the mercy of Christ his Savior. And I was struck by how similar his words were to a Union man I'd seen die a few days before. And I thought, although these men are enemies in life and death, they are both children of the same God. And after that, I could not look on the enemy quite the same way. I found his commanding officer at the camp, presented him with the watch. He cried and asked me to take him to the house where the body lay. I agreed. They gave me a horse, and we rode. I thought I'd just try to ride away, but there were about 20 rebels with me, and I felt sure that they would shoot me. So I waited until one asked me to go down the road and see if I saw any Union men coming. I took advantage of that. I am now aide-de-camp to Colonel Orlando Poe. I wish my friends could see me in my present uniform. Our brigade will probably charge the enemy's works this afternoon. God grant them success. As I write this, the roar of the cannon and the muskets is almost deafening. This may be my last entry in this journal. God's will be done. I commend myself to him, soul and body. Poe has mounted his horse. I must close. He says, "Come."